Hey everyone. So, this week we are reading an amazing, disturbing, violent play. Mythology is not for the faint of heart, if you haven't already guessed. We're reading this incredible play, Bacchae, by Euripides, and you have lecture notes, and I sent around some videos today to provide a little bit more context and detail about Dionysus as a character and a god, and also a little bit about the play itself. Um, on your syllabus, you should all be reading this particular edition, which contains on its cover a very like menacing, pretty sexy, young looking Elvis Presley, guilty as charged. This is the edition that I'm hoping that you're reading. This is translated by Paul Woodruff, and it has really good, solid, scholarly introductory material that I've also assigned. So I'm hoping that you all have had a chance to read through this scholarly material as well, because it really provides a sort of broader scope of some necessary context for getting the most that you can out of this particular play. Because it's a complicated play, because Dionysus as a character is a complicated character, I'm going to just sort of orally go over some of my lecture notes for you all, just to highlight not all of the points, but just to highlight some of the critical points that I think are really necessary for us to have, this sort of really important context to be able to enter into this play and feel a little bit more situated. Okay, so about Dionysus himself, he is, as we commonly know about him, we see him as the god of intoxication, of wine. He seems like a party dude, right? Like, he seems like your resident frat boy Greek god. And he is that to some extent, but he is certainly more, and we will see this in the play, and we've read about this a bit, he's certainly more of a complicated, mysterious character. Firstly, he is the illegitimate son of Zeus, who we all know is a bit of a playboy, and a mortal woman named Semele, who is of royalty. She's the daughter of Cadmus, who in the play we know to be the founder of Thebes, which is where this play takes place, which is a sort of small city-state near Athens. Okay, so she is the daughter of Cadmus, so she's royalty, but she ends up having a sexual liaison with Zeus, and Hera, Zeus's wife, is not dumb and finds out, disguises herself as an old woman and one of Semele's maids, just to sort of like find out some information to confirm that it is in fact her husband who's been boning her. And when she does find out, in fact, that it is her husband cheating, she sets a scheme up so that Semele will essentially die. She tells Semele that she should ask Zeus to show himself to her in his mortal form, and she knows in his sort of like true original godly form, and Hera knows that no mortal can actually withstand seeing this, and so Semele convinces Zeus to do this, and she is immediately killed. Zeus, oh, by the way, Semele, as we know, is pregs. She's knocked up, takes the baby, sews it into his thigh, hides the baby from Hera, allows the baby to grow and develop, and when Hera finds out that Dionysus has in fact been born, she banishes him. This is why, two important things about this. One, this is why Dionysus is often seen as a sort of like foreign, outside god who the people of Greece didn't initially take to worshiping. He actually, in fact, was one of the original Greek gods and is considered one of the Greek gods and was heavily worshipped, particularly among women, which I'll get to. But he's seen as a foreigner because he was sort of cast out by Hera. This is also important because it kind of gives us a little bit of insight into why Dionysus is so pissed, and why he feels that he needs to avenge himself and avenge his mother, and why he returns to Thebes in the context of this play, which is his birthplace, to sort of seek revenge on his mother's family, who denied that she had a relationship with Zeus. They were like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, he would be with you. Denied that she had a relationship with Zeus, and denied, more to the point, denied Dionysus's legitimacy as a god. And so he comes back pretty pissed. So Dionysus is the god of wine and intoxication. He's presented often as both masculine and feminine. We see in the play that he presents himself as this sort of beautiful, effeminate male that Pentheus himself can't even help but sort of like notice and be drawn to. But he's also the god of thunder, and he's mysterious and manipulative. And so we need to be aware of these sort of contradictions about him as both a figure that inspires joy and, really importantly, freedom, freedom of mind, freedom from feeling socially confined by law, by order. But he also has an agenda, and he also has an ego. And both of those things come into play specifically in Bacchae, as we will see. Okay, so that's a little bit about Dionysus. Another important sort of background information is about Greek culture itself. At the time, there were all different city-states. Each city-state had its own set of sort of laws, customs, and worshiping practices. Each city-state tended to have a specific god or goddess that it worshipped regularly. And women were particularly drawn to Dionysus. As we see in this play, Dionysus has a sort of devout following of female worshippers called Bacchants or Maenads. They are part of the chorus in this play, and Dionysus, when he comes back to Thebes, has also, as we see, driven mad the sisters of Semele. So Agave, who is Pentheus's mom, is among one of these Bacchants who is now out in the mountains, sort of ripping animals to shreds and worshiping Dionysus. It's important to understand the act of worshiping Dionysus. It was an initiation process, essentially, where people would, in their worship, essentially, seemingly, lose their mind, go insane. It's complicated because in going insane, it's as if they sort of regain sort of their consciousness and regain their sanity by being able to clearly see Dionysus sort of in all of his godly glory, and to really free themselves from all of the strictures of the society in which they lived. And for women in particular, at this time, they were incredibly limited in terms of their power. They were basically banished to the home. They were under the thumb of their husband or their fathers. And so for women in particular, worshiping Dionysus and going through, consciously and willingly, going through this initiation process in which they did essentially like lose their sense of reality and rationality, liberated them in a way that allowed them to see sort of like the truth, allowed them to be their truest selves, and in doing so, and in freeing their minds, gain a kind of soundness and experience Dionysus in all of his sort of glory, and be able to sort of, commune with Dionysus in all of his greatness. So that is also important. We see throughout this play that there are a lot of binaries coming up and rubbing up against one another. There are a lot of contradictions. One of them is rationality versus madness. And we see this as a sort of main trope throughout this play. So we see it with the Bacchants, who seemingly are mad. They're, dancing and drinking and, ripping animals apart with their teeth, which obviously turns into this terrible violation at the end of the play between Agave and her son Pentheus. Not to give away too much, we haven't finished it yet, but spoiler, sort of little spoiler. So you have these Bacchants who are sort of presented as mad. You have Dionysus, who is this master manipulator who blurs the lines between madness and rationality. And then on the other side, you have someone like Pentheus, who's this, young king of Thebes, college age, sort of feeling himself right now, feeling his sense of power, feeling a little invincible. And he really represents the opposite of Dionysus. If Dionysus is about freedom and worshiping the gods and this sort of old guard of mortals not being more powerful than gods, Pentheus is very much a sort of new guard who is asserting his own sense of power and his own sense of control, and in doing so, undermining the power of the gods and representing sort of rationality. He can't understand that these women are not crazy, but rather are sort of enlightened through this initiation process in worshiping Dionysus. So that's one major contrast that happens throughout the play. You have other ones. You have freedom and entrapment. You have tradition versus a sort of progressive thinking. You have femininity versus masculinity. You have life versus death. You have the divine law versus mortal human law. These are all sort of binaries that are sort of bumping up against one another. All of these tensions that are sort of existing throughout the course of this play. Okay. What else do I want to say about this? The setting of the play, as we know, is Thebes. It had actually a solid amount of following in worshiping Dionysus, particularly the women. And as we said, when we get to that sort of rationally versus madness conflict, we see Pentheus, being really, really alarmed by the fact that his mother in particular, but also these women are sort of, out in the wild doing all of these crazy, sex acts and, sort of drinking and behaving in ways that were completely counterintuitive to how women were supposed to behave at that time in order to keep law and order and civility, which was incredibly important. And so he's really threatened by this display, but he's also really curious. He's young. He's, 19, 20. So he's curious about what's going on, and he's really drawn to sort of being a bystander at the least, and at the most a participant. And Dionysus sort of manipulates him into sort of being able to witness these acts. But of course, Dionysus has a much darker plan for Pentheus and Agave and the entire royal family for reasons that I established earlier, right? He's pissed, he wants revenge, and he wants to really sort of reassert himself as the god worthy of worship and sort of reclaim or remind everyone in Thebes that, this way of being, of worshiping the gods, is the proper way of being. And you see older characters like Cadmus, who is the former king of Thebes, or Tiresias, who's the sort of seer, being respectful of that. Even though they're not, running off to the mountains, they do respect Dionysus, and they do respect the sort of order of the gods being paramount. And at the very least, worthy of the respect of mortals, including kings. And they try to sort of warn Pentheus about this, like, cool it, don't get so high on your horse here. Remember that there is a sort of way in which, we do things here. Don't violate that way, because you could offend the gods, and if you do offend the gods, then there's going to be retribution, and there is. Okay, so that's the setting, is Thebes. We've talked about Pentheus. We've talked about Agave. I don't want to say too much more about that here, because I want you to read the rest of the play, and then we can discuss the ending. It is violent and it is disturbing, so I just want to provide you with that kind of fair warning. A little bit about how these sort of plays were performed in ancient Greece, and we're talking like 400s BCE, which is when Euripides was alive and writing. Oftentimes these plays were performed during a large festival. Oftentimes they were in praise of Dionysus. And so for 3 days, the town would essentially shut down. People would be, it's like Mardi Gras. People are just boozing in the street. There's boobs out everywhere. Everybody is, prisoners were freed, debts were cleared. This was just a sort of a couple of days of, really, really sort of letting loose and getting in touch with their more intuitive, instinctive nature, not the sort of buttoned up, civilized, law and order city-states that were sort of established. And at the end of these festivals, oftentimes these plays would be performed in honor of the gods, and they would be the same kind of like stories that would be told and performed over and over again in a kind of open-aired, like amphitheater of sorts. And you would have a set of actors. They were all male. They would often use masks in order to distinguish male or female characters. You had, in certain cases, as we see here, you had messengers who were sort of off stage, who would help the audience understand any other sort of background information that they needed that wasn't being orally performed via conversation or argument, via the actors. And sometimes you would have the chorus. They're speaking in much more poetic language, oftentimes. And they too sort of, kind of foreshadow. They also fill in some historical information or any sort of narrative points that need to be made that are not being performed actively on stage. So oftentimes there would be 3 tragedies that would be performed, and then followed by a comedy. Tragedies were actually like thought of as really sort of powerful and positive for people. They tended to inspire a like catharsis of emotion in the viewers, and this is sort of capped off these festivals that were essentially intended, again, to kind of free people of any sort of negative thought or any sort of strictures or law or order. They were really intended to liberate the mind and liberate people's emotions. And so these tragedies would be performed, but they were intended to be a kind of cathartic process for the audience. Okay, I think that's most of what I want to highlight for you all, just so that you have another means of kind of at least hearing some of the more important themes and elements and backgrounds of this particular play. So, happy reading. We're only reading introductory notes in the first part of the play for our discussion forum that ends tomorrow at 10 p.m. And then Thursday through Sunday, we're going to be reading the rest of the play, and we'll have our final, we'll finish our discussion forum on Sunday. On Sunday, remember, you also have your first short writing assignment. I will post another video just sort of highlighting verbally what I'm expecting from these short writing assignments, and you should also review the documents under resources, which really goes into much more detail about the nature of these assignments. And you should also read through the samples. I gave you 2 samples from previous students, not on Bacchae. On Sunday, the prompt will be specifically on Euripides Bacchae. And by that point, you should have read, the full play, and you'll have one discussion forum fully under your belt. You are still obviously expected to submit in the discussion forum on Sunday. So if I were you, I'd try to maybe post a little earlier, post on Saturday or Friday, just so that you free up Sunday to do the short writing assignment. If you can't, it's fine. Maybe doing the short writing assignment will actually formalize your ideas and your thoughts, and you'll more easily be able to post in our discussion forum. But make sure you review both of those documents that I just noted. Email me if you have any questions specifically about short writing assignments, or if you have any sort of conflict that needs to be addressed. If I need to open up another day for you or schedule another time when you can complete it. I do try to provide you with like a pretty large span of time, a 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. You have between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Sunday to complete this assignment. So ideally, you'll be able to do it at some point. It should take around 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes of writing. And you can use your text. You should use your text. So it should be manageable. Sundays tend to work better because even though some people work, most don't, and there's not, it's not during the week when you also have classes going on a different schedule. So if you do have a conflict or if there is a legitimate problem, just be in touch with me as soon as possible so that we can work that out. And be in touch with any other questions if you have them. Okay, I'm going to sign off, and I will see you in the forum. Okay, bye. Happy reading.